The valet at the front of Wexford General's new pavilion looked at the woman stepping out of the black car and decided, in the half-second people used to decide such things, that she did not belong. "Deliveries and staff are around back, ma'am," he said, already turning to the next vehicle. "Loading docks off Calhoun." The woman in the charcoal dress paused. She wore no jewelry except a thin gold band and small pearl studs, the kind of understated that money learns and old money forgets. Her shoes were plain. Her posture was not. "I'm a guest," she said. "I have an invitation." The valet's smile stiffened into something polite and disbelieving. "Of course. Main entrance is just there." He said it, the way you'd tell a child the exit, and he did not offer to help her with the door. Her name was Sella Ellison, and in 90 minutes, the woman who ran this hospital would call her a thief in front of 400 people, refuse her hand 3 separate times, and order her removed from a building that Sella's foundation had, as of 9 days ago, come to own outright. Priscilla Ashcombe did not know any of this yet. That was the whole point of the evening. Sella had asked specifically that no one tell her. Sella Ellison had grown up in a shotgun house on John's Island, close enough to the water that the whole place smelled of pluff mud at low tide. Her mother, Cora, cleaned rooms at a hospital across the harbor. Not this one, a smaller one that closed years ago, riding the first bus in the dark and the last bus home. Cora came back with her feet swollen and her hands smelling of bleach, and she never once, in all the years Sella could remember, complained about the smell. Her father worked a shrimp boat until his hip gave out, and after that he fixed other men's engines in a shed behind the house and pretended the pain wasn't there. Neither of them had finished the 9th grade. Both of them believed, with a stubbornness that bordered on religion, that their daughter would. Sela won a scholarship to a magnet school where she was one of 6 black students in a class of 200. She learned there how to be excellent and invisible at the same time, how to be the smartest person in the room and still be asked to fetch the coffee. She went to Howard, then to medical school at Meharry, then to a cardiothoracic surgery fellowship where a senior attending told her, on her first day, that they'd never had a girl like her make it through. She made it through. By 40, she had her own hands inside more than 2,000 chests, and a reputation among the people who kept such rankings as one of the finest cardiac surgeons in the Southeast. But surgery had shown her something that operating alone could not fix. She watched hospitals fail, not the good ones, the poor ones, the rural ones, the ones full of patients who looked like the people she'd grown up beside. She watched them get bought by men who stripped them for parts and left the wreckage behind. So she stopped operating, or mostly stopped, and started buying the wreckage herself. She built Larkspur Health Partners out of a rented office and a line of credit no bank had wanted to give her, and over 11 years she turned it into a foundation and investment group that had rescued 41 hospitals across 9 states. She did not do interviews. She did not go to conferences. She let the work be the noise. 9 days ago, Larkspur had completed the acquisition of the Wexford Health System, 3 hospitals and a network of clinics anchored by Wexford General in downtown Charleston. The flagship, 130 years old, marble in the lobby, portraits of dead Ashcombes on the walls, and a balance sheet quietly bleeding out. The Ashcombe family had run it for 4 generations the way you run a thing you were born owning. The current president, Priscilla Ashcombe, had inherited the title the way some people inherit a laugh. Before she signed, Sella had done what she always did. She read everything. Not just the finances, the exit interviews, the internal complaints, and what she found in the Wexford files had made her put the papers down and sit very still for a while. In 6 years under Priscilla Ashcombe, 4 physicians of color had left Wexford General. 2 of them had filed formal grievances describing a hostile environment, credit for their work handed to junior white colleagues, patient loads assigned to punish. A cardiologist named Yolanda Rhodes had documented 11 separate incidents over a single year before she gave up and moved to Atlanta. Every one of those complaints had been routed to the same office and closed with the same 3 words: not a fit. Sella had read Yolanda Rhodes's letter twice. She remembered the last line of it. She remembered all of them. When the deal closed, Larkspur's board asked Sella how she wanted to introduce herself to the Wexford staff and community. There was a gala already on the calendar, the dedication of the new cardiac pavilion, a building funded largely by donors Priscilla had spent 2 years flattering. Sella said she'd do it there, in person, and she asked that her name be kept off the program until the last moment. She told the board, to see the place as it actually was. Now she stood in the great atrium of the new pavilion, and she was seeing it. The room was beautiful in the expensive, anxious way of rooms built to be photographed. A curved wall of glass looked out over the Ashley River. A string trio played something bright near the reflecting pool that some architect had installed indoors, apparently, for the sole purpose of making people feel that water was a luxury. 400 guests moved through the space holding flutes of champagne. Surgeons and their spouses, a senator, a bishop, developers, the kind of philanthropists who measured their generosity by the size of the plaque. Waiters in white jackets threaded between them, carrying trays. Sela took a glass of sparkling water from one of those trays and began quietly to walk the room. The first cluster she approached stood near the reflecting pool, 2 men in tuxedos and a woman whose diamonds threw little coins of light across her collarbone. They were discussing a house one of them was building on Kiowa. "Good evening," Sela said. "Wonderful space, isn't it?" The conversation didn't stop so much as it curdled. The taller man's eyes went to her, then away, then back, a slow appraisal that started at her shoes. "Can we help you with something?" he said, in a tone that made it clear the only help on offer was directions to the door. "Just enjoying the evening." She extended her hand. "Sela Ellison." He looked at the hand. He did not take it. Instead, he turned to the woman beside him and said, not quietly, "I thought they had a list for these things." The woman studied her champagne. The third man discovered something absorbing about his cufflink. No one shook Sela's hand. The circle rotated a few degrees inward and closed like a door, and after a moment, there was nothing to do but withdraw the hand and move on. She moved on. Near the coat check, she found a young woman she recognized, though the young woman didn't recognize her. Bailey Nunez, 26, a cardiac nurse whose personnel file Sela had read 3 nights ago, along with everyone else's. Bailey looked like she'd been dressed by an older sister and was terrified of spilling something. Sela smiled at her, a real smile, and got a shy one back, and moved past before the girl could feel obligated to talk. The second refusal came 10 minutes later, and it came from Priscilla Ashcombe herself. Priscilla stood at the base of the grand stair, beneath a portrait of her great-grandfather, holding court. She was 41 and looked expensively younger, in a column of pale silver silk, and she moved through the donors around her like a woman who had never in her life waited for a room to notice her. Her laugh was loud and arrived precisely on cue. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Colin Ashby, hovered 3 steps back with a tablet clutched to his chest, scanning the crowd like a man watching for weather. It was Colin who saw Sela first. He leaned to Priscilla's ear. Priscilla did not turn around. She asked something. Colin answered, low, and the only word that carried was recognize. Priscilla's eyes found Sela across 10 feet of marble, held her for 1 flat second, and moved on. She said something to the woman beside her. The woman laughed. Sela walked to the edge of the circle and waited. She did not push in. She had spent a lifetime learning the exact geometry of these rooms, the way attention could be denied to you, like a chair pulled back at the last second, and she knew how to stand in a doorway that people were pretending wasn't there. There was a pause. Priscilla's gaze flicked to her, annoyed now, the way you'd look at a phone that kept buzzing during dinner. "Good evening," Sela said pleasantly. "I don't think we've been introduced." We haven't been introduced," Priscilla said, "because I'm in the middle of a conversation." Her voice was polished and cold and pitched to be heard. If you're with one of the vendors, the catering coordinator is through those doors. If you've lost your way, I'm sure security can help you find it. I'm a guest, Miss Ashcombe. Selah kept her voice even. She extended her hand a second time. I was hoping to introduce myself. Priscilla looked at the hand the way a person looks at something on the bottom of a shoe. Her lip moved, a small involuntary thing. Every muscle in her leaned back. I don't shake hands with people I don't know, she said. And I don't know you. So I'm going to suggest very kindly that you find somewhere quiet to stand until you remember whatever it is you think you're here to do. She turned her back. The circle closed. Someone in it, a man with a red face and a hedge fund tan named Reed Kavanagh, smiled into his glass in a way that invited the others to smile too, and they did. For 3 seconds, Selah's hand stayed in the air, a small bridge to nothing. Then she lowered it, finger by finger, and stepped back. Colin Ashby appeared at her elbow with a clipboard held like a shield. Ma'am, can I help you find your seat? Dinner's about to be called. It was not a courtesy. It was a removal, the polite kind, the kind performed by frightened men on behalf of powerful ones. He walked beside her the way a tug nudges a ship off the dock, steering without appearing to touch, until she was on the far side of the atrium near the service corridor, where the light was dimmer and the tables were thinner. He left her at a half-empty table, whose place cards read names she didn't know. From across the room, Priscilla watched her sit. She leaned toward the woman beside her, Pamela something, the wife of a judge, and said, loud enough to reach the nearest tables, I swear these things attract more strays every year. Next time I'm tripling the door budget. 2 tables over, an old man heard it. Walter Hess, 81, a retired cardiologist, who had trained half the surgeons in the room, set down his fork and looked at Priscilla, with the expression of a man watching a house he'd built catch fire from the inside. He said something under his breath to his wife. She put her hand over his and shook her head. Don't. Selah heard all of it. The atrium had been designed to carry the string trio to every corner. It carried cruelty just as cleanly. She laid her napkin across her lap and squared her silverware, fork and knife and spoon, aligning them the way she aligned instruments on a tray before a long operation, and she waited. And while she waited, she remembered. She remembered a nurse's station in a hospital across the harbor where her mother had mopped floors after midnight so that men in white coats could walk on them in the morning without ever seeing who had made them clean. She remembered being 19 and told by an admissions officer, without malice, as though he were doing her a favor, that she might be happier somewhere less demanding. She remembered the client who, once, at a dinner meant to celebrate a hospital her foundation had saved, shook every hand at the table but hers, and then asked her to refill the water. She had built Larkspur on the back of moments exactly like this one. Every closed circle, every hand withheld, every room that had decided about her before she opened her mouth. She let Priscilla Ashcombe fill this room with her noise. Tomorrow she would let her learn what silence sounds like when it belongs to somebody else. Dinner came. The 4 other guests at Selah's table arrived, registered her, and rearranged themselves toward the far end, leaving 2 empty chairs between themselves and the strange woman in the charcoal dress, like birds shifting down a wire. A man in wire-rimmed glasses murmured to the woman beside him, Do you think she knows anyone here? The woman shook her head, clearly not. Selah cut her fish. She chewed slowly. She listened to the conversations flowing past her about second homes and school waitlists, and she let them pass through her the way river water passes through a piling. At the head table, beneath the spotlight, Priscilla Ashcombe was flanked by donors. Reed Kavanagh had been watching Selah since the salad course, not with curiosity but with the lazy amusement of a boy watching an insect he intended to step on. Pris, he said, tilting his glass at her. Who's your friend by the service door? The one dining alone like she lost a bet. No idea, Priscilla said. Some crasher. Colin couldn't find her on the master list. And she's still here? Kavanagh grinned. What's the point of a door if you don't use it? She claims she has an invitation. Priscilla rolled her eyes. I've asked Curtis to keep an eye on her. Curtis Van was the head of security, a broad-shouldered black man in his 50s who had spent 20 years in the army before this, and who had already found Sela on the monitors and been told to watch her. He didn't like the assignment, and he liked the reason even less. And when the order came down to keep eyes on the woman by the service corridor, he had exhaled slowly through his nose and said nothing. And then he had quietly told his people to stand down unless something physical happened. Curtis Van had spent a great deal of his life being watched in rooms like this. He knew exactly what it felt like to be the object of a radio call, and he was ashamed tonight to be the one making it. Colin Ashby leaned into Priscilla's ear again. Ma'am, I checked with the board office. Her invitation's actually legitimate. It was added by the transition team about a week ago. Priscilla frowned. Transition team? What transition team? I don't. The authorization came from above my clearance. Then find someone whose clearance isn't useless, Priscilla snapped, and Colin retreated like a man backing away from a lit fuse. At 9:15, Priscilla rose to give her remarks. She climbed to the small stage with the ease of a woman who had been standing above people her whole life. Behind her, a screen carried the Wexford crest, a gold shield borrowed from a century the family had no real claim to. Thank you all for being here, she began, and her voice filled the atrium like perfume inescapable. This pavilion represents everything Wexford has always stood for: excellence, legacy, standards. She let the words sit. Standards, she said again, in how we heal, in who we hire, in who we welcome through our doors. Excellence isn't something you achieve by opening the gates to everyone. It's selective, and that selectivity is exactly what separates an institution like ours from the rest. Scattered applause. A few nods. Walter Hess did not clap. He sat with his arms folded and watched her with an old man's tired disgust. Selah listened without moving, her hands flat on the tablecloth, her eyes on Priscilla with the focused, unhurried attention a surgeon gives an image on a light board before deciding where to open. Priscilla talked for 11 more minutes. She spoke of growth and generosity and the culture of distinction she had built. She named donors. She named the pavilion's architect. She did not name Yolanda Rhodes. She did not mention 4 physicians who had left, or the grievances closed with 3 words, or the quiet, unwritten understanding at Wexford about which doctors got the difficult service and which got the corner office. She spoke as though the hospital's story began and ended with her family's name carved above the door. When she finished, the room applauded, and Priscilla came down the stairs like a queen leaving a balcony. Selah stood up. She crossed the atrium floor a 3rd time, unhurried, her shoulders square. Curtis Van's people tracked the movement and did not intervene. Curtis had told them to hold. Priscilla reached the bottom of the stairs and saw Selah coming, and her face shifted, not to fear, but to a flat homeowner's irritation at a weed pushing up through the pavement one more time. Selah stopped 2 feet in front of her, close enough now for the whole ring of donors to hear. Miss Ashcombe, she said, and her voice was low and steady and entirely calm. I've been trying to introduce myself all evening. My name is Selah Ellison. I believe you and I have a great deal of business to discuss. She extended her hand a 3rd time. Priscilla looked at the hand. She looked at the face. She tilted her head the way you'd tilt it at a dog that had done a clever thing and still wasn't coming inside. Business, she said. You and I have no business. I don't know who told you that you could walk up to me 3 times in one night, but let me be extremely clear. She stepped in, and her voice dropped to a hiss that somehow carried farther than a shout. You don't belong here. You never did. I have been more patient than you have any right to expect, and you keep pushing. So here is the last thing I'm going to say to you. Take your hand, take your little dress, and take whatever fantasy walked you through my doors, and get out, before I have you dragged out in front of every person in this room. She did not whisper it. She projected it. The nearest 40 people heard every word. Forks stopped. A woman 2 tables away lifted her phone, and a small red dot began to blink in the low light like a patient heartbeat. Reed Kavanaugh leaned back with his arms crossed, grinning the way a man grins at his favorite scene in a film he's already seen. Sella did not lower her hand. Not yet. She held it there, open, steady, patient, for 5 full seconds. 5 seconds is a very long time when a room is watching. It is long enough for a heart to beat 7 times. It is long enough for a career to end. Then she lowered it, finger by finger, the same as the first time and the second. "I understand," she said. 2 words, quiet, final. She turned and walked back toward her table. Behind her, Reed Kavanaugh raised his glass and said, loud enough for half the room, "Somebody should have checked the loading dock an hour ago." And the laughter came, sharp, cruel, the specific laughter that exists only to remind a person they are less. It bounced off the glass wall and the marble and the water no one needed. Selah sat down. She folded her napkin and set it on the table, and for the first time that evening she smiled. It was not warm, and it was not bitter. It was the smile of a woman who has just been handed exactly what she came for. Every refusal, every insult, the red dot still blinking 3 tables away. All of it freely given by people who did not yet understand they had spent the whole night building the case against themselves. She reached into her small bag and turned on her phone. One message waited from the man Larkspur's board had hired to MC the second half of the evening, a distinguished silver-haired MC named Harold Prentice. It read, "Ready when you are, Dr. Ellison." She typed back, 10 minutes. She set the phone down. She took a sip of water. 10 minutes was all Priscilla Ashcombe had left. She simply didn't know it yet. At 9:32, the house lights dimmed. The string trio stopped mid-phrase. A single spotlight found the stage, and the murmur of the room died the way a flame dies when you cap the glass. Harold Prentice walked to the podium. He had a voice built to fill cathedrals, and he used it now with the unhurried precision of a man who understood that a well-placed silence is louder than any applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for a beautiful evening. Before we go on, I have the great privilege of making an introduction." At the head table, Priscilla Ashcombe raised her champagne and smiled. She assumed, as she always assumed, that this was about her. "As many of you know," Harold continued, "the Wexford health system recently completed a significant transition. 9 days ago, Wexford General and its affiliated hospitals were acquired by Larkspur Health Partners, one of the most respected healthcare foundations in the country." A murmur moved through the room. Priscilla's smile thinned. She had known about the acquisition, of course. She had been briefed. But the announcement was supposed to come next week, in a release she had personally approved. "Not here, not like this. Tonight," Harold said, "it is my honor to introduce the chairman of Larkspur Health Partners, the woman who now oversees every hospital, every clinic, and every physician in the Wexford system." He let the silence breathe, the way a conductor holds a rest before the last movement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Selah Ellison." The screen behind him changed. A portrait appeared. The same woman in the charcoal dress. Except in the photograph, she stood in surgical scrubs outside an operating suite, and beneath the image ran a single line, "Cardiothoracic surgeon, founder, Larkspur Health Partners." The room did not applaud. It froze. 400 people sat in absolute, airless silence. Forks hung in space. Glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Priscilla Ashcombe's face went white, not pale. White, the color draining out of it fast and irreversible, like water out of a cracked vase. Her lips parted. No sound came. The hand holding her champagne began, very slightly, to shake, and a single drop slid down the outside of the flute and fell to the white cloth, and spread into a small dark circle the size of a coin. Reed Kavanaugh's grin collapsed. His eyes went from the screen to Selah's empty chair to the stage and back, hunting for the version of events in which this was not real. He didn't find it. Colin Ashby stood by the service door with his tablet hanging at his side, and the words "transition team" began to ring in his skull like a bell he couldn't stop. Selah pushed back her chair and stood. She did not hurry. She walked across the atrium floor a fourth and final time, and every head turned to follow her. Curtis Van's people, the same people who had been told to keep eyes on her, stepped aside. Curtis himself straightened his shoulders as she passed and gave her a small nod, almost too small to see. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and shook Harold Prentice's hand, the first handshake of the evening that anyone had returned. Then she stood at the podium and looked out over the room until she found Priscilla's face. She did not repeat the insults back. She did not have to. Everyone in the room was already replaying the last 2 hours, quietly rewriting their own parts, wondering how loudly they had laughed and how visible it had been. "Good evening," Sela said. Her voice was the same calm it had been all night. "I'm Sela Ellison. As of last week, I'm responsible for this hospital and the people in it, and I want to begin by telling you that I've learned more about Wexford in the last 2 hours than any report could have taught me." She paused. The room held its breath. "I've seen how this institution treats people it doesn't recognize. I've seen how it treats people it has already decided are beneath its standards. And I can tell you, starting tonight, that is going to change." She did not raise her voice. She did not slam the podium. She spoke the way the ground speaks in an earthquake, from somewhere too deep to argue with. Then she stepped down. The applause that followed was not the kind that celebrates. It was the kind that fills a vacuum, because silence has become unbearable, scattered, uncertain, the sound of people clapping because they can't think what else to do with their hands. Priscilla Ashcombe was already moving. She pushed back from the head table so hard her chair shrieked against the marble, and she crossed the floor in 9 quick strides, her heels striking the stone like someone running toward a building already burning. "Dr. Ellison," her voice cracked on the name. "Dr. Ellison, please?" I had no idea. If I had known who you were. Sela stopped and turned to face her, and her expression had not changed since the podium. Calm, level, the kind of calm that leaves no room to bargain. "If you had known who I was," Sela repeated. "That's an interesting sentence, Miss Ashcombe. Let me ask you something. If I had been exactly the person you took me for tonight, a stranger, a nobody, someone off the loading dock, would any of it have been all right?" Priscilla's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You told me to crawl back where I came from," Sela said, and her voice did not rise. "You told me I didn't belong. You told your assistant to steer me to a corner. You called me a stray in front of your donors, twice. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. I didn't come here tonight to test you. I came here to do my job. But you tested yourself in front of 400 witnesses, and the results are very clear." Priscilla's eyes filled. Whether it was shame or fear or calculation was impossible to say. "Please," she whispered. "I can explain. I didn't mean." "You meant every word," Sela said. "The only thing you didn't mean to do was say it to the wrong person." And that's precisely the problem. Behind Priscilla, Reed Kavanaugh had not moved from his chair. His face had gone the gray of the untouched oysters on his plate. He gripped the edge of the table as though letting go would send him through the floor. The man who had toasted the loading dock was now trying very hard to become invisible. Colin Ashby appeared at Priscilla's side, tablet against his chest. "Dr. Ellison, perhaps we should." "Mr. Ashby," Sela said, and he stopped mid-word. "I heard everything tonight, including your part in it, and I've read the grievance files that came across your desk in the last 3 years. So has my legal team as of an hour ago." Colin took a step back and said nothing at all. Sela lifted her phone and made a call. It connected on the second ring. "Marguerite, it's Sela. I need legal on a line in 30 minutes. Open a full review of the Wexford system. Executive conduct, HR complaints, personnel files, promotion data, all of it, 3 years back. Yes, tonight." She ended the call and looked at Priscilla. "You are suspended as president of this hospital, effective now. You will not enter any Wexford facility. You will not contact any employee. You will not issue any statement. That is pending the outcome of a formal investigation." "You can't," Priscilla started. "I can," Sela said. "I just did." She turned to Curtis Van, who stood 6 feet away and had heard every word. His jaw was tight, his hands were loose at his sides. "Mr. Van," she said, "would you please walk Miss Ashcombe to her car?" Curtis Van stepped forward. The same man who had been ordered an hour before to keep eyes on Sella Ellison, to track her, to treat her as a threat, now walked Priscilla Ashcombe through the atrium she had ruled, past the tables and the staring faces and the reflecting pool, and out through the wide glass doors of the pavilion. Her family's name was carved above. The irony was lost on no one. The woman who had tried to have a black woman removed from her hospital was removed from it by the very security she'd weaponized. The doors sighed shut behind her, and the sound moved through the marble lobby like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The video was online by 11:40 that night, less than 2 hours after Priscilla left the building. Bailey Nunez, the young nurse who had recorded it from 3 tables away, posted it with a single line. "The president of my hospital told this woman to crawl back to the gutter and called security on her. Turns out, she's the woman who owns the place now. Watch to the end. By midnight it had 40,000 views. By 2 it had crossed 500,000. By sunrise it was everywhere. Morning shows, group chats, comment sections in a dozen languages. The clip of Priscilla Hitchinson, crawl back where you came from, was cut loose, looped, and shared until it became its own small landmark in the public vocabulary. A hashtag started trending before dawn. By noon, it was the top tag in the country, and by evening it had jumped to the UK and Canada and South Africa, carried by the particular fury that comes from watching, on camera, something you have lived yourself. The trucks arrived outside Wexford General the next morning. Reporters knocked on doors, and former employees who had left quietly began for the first time to speak. A retired charge nurse named Etta Boone told a local station, "What happened to that lady at the Gala? That was a Tuesday for us. Every Tuesday. Every holiday party where we were the only ones in the room who looked like each other." Larkspur released a statement at 9. 3 paragraphs. It confirmed the suspension, announced a full investigation into the culture and practices of the Wexford system, and closed with a single line the papers would quote for weeks. "No one who treats another human being with the contempt shown last night has any place leading an institution meant to care for people." The investigation took 12 days. What it found was worse than the video. 4 physicians of color had left Wexford General within 6 years of Priscilla Ashcombe taking over. 3 had filed formal grievances describing a hostile environment, credits stolen, punitive schedules. Dr. Yolanda Rhodes, a cardiologist, had documented 11 incidents in a single year. Excluded from case conferences, her outcomes questioned in front of residents, told by Priscilla herself that she wasn't the right face for the donors. Every complaint had been routed to Colin Ashby's office. Everyone had been marked, reviewed, and resolved without a single interview conducted, a single witness contacted, a single document read. Colin admitted, under questioning from Larkspur's lawyers, that Priscilla had told him to make them disappear. The findings leaked before Larkspur could publish them. A reporter ran the story under the headline Inside Wexford. Years of discrimination behind a gold crest. It named Priscilla. It named Colin. It named the 4 doctors pushed out, and it quoted Yolanda Rhodes, who said, "I watched that video, and I felt every single thing that woman felt on that stage. The only difference is that nobody was recording the day it happened to me." Priscilla Ashcombe was terminated on a Tuesday morning. The board's letter cited gross misconduct, violation of the Code of Ethics, and willful suppression of discrimination complaints. She lost her salary and her seat, and the severance her family's lawyers had built into her contract 2 decades earlier. Because the termination clause she'd never bothered to read voided all of it, in the event of documented discrimination. Her attorneys appealed. It was denied within 72 hours. Reed Kavanaugh's evening cost him differently. The video showed him plainly, laughing, toasting, the loading dock line clear as a bell. His development firm's largest partner, a state pension fund, pulled its money within the week. Two of his own partners issued a statement distancing themselves. By the end of the month, he had resigned from the company that carried his name. The man who had joked about uninvited guests had become one in his own industry. Colin Ashby was let go the same week. He gave a single interview in which he said he had only been doing what he was told, and the internet was not gentle about that particular sentence. A class action was filed 31 days after the gala. Yolanda Rhodes and two of the other departed physicians were joined by 5 current employees who came forward after the video spread. It named Priscilla, Colin, and the Wexford system, and it was settled 7 months later for terms that were confidential, but that sources put well above $10 million. As part of it, Priscilla Ashcombe was required to complete 200 hours of service with a civil rights organization. Not the kind she could write a check to, but the kind where she would sit across a table from the people she had spent her life looking past, and listen. Celia Ellison did not celebrate. She gave no victory speech and posted nothing. On the day the settlement was announced, she was in her office reviewing a rural hospital in Alabama that Larkspur was trying to keep from closing. And when her assistant brought her coffee, she said, "Thank you," and went back to work. But that evening, she did one thing that wasn't on her schedule. She drove out to John's Island. She parked across from the shotgun house where she'd grown up. Smaller than she remembered, the porch still leaning left. A child's bicycle chained to the rail with one wheel gone. She sat there for a while and looked at the window of the room where her mother used to iron other people's clothes past midnight so that Sella would have a clean shirt for a school that didn't want her. Then she drove home. A year later, Wexford General was not the hospital Priscilla Ashcombe had run. Sella had not gutted it or sold it for parts. She had done the harder thing and rebuilt it from the inside. One policy and one hire and one hard conversation at a time. The new president was Dr. Adana Reeves, 46, a pediatric surgeon with 15 years in hospital administration and the first black woman to lead any institution in the Larkspur network. She had been Sella's third choice. The first two had turned it down, wary of a place still smoking from a scandal. Adana took it anyway. When a reporter asked her why, she said, "Because somebody has to be the first person to walk back into a room that was built to keep people out." Under Adana, Wexford hired its first chief equity officer. It built an anonymous reporting line that bypassed management entirely. It partnered with 2 historically black medical schools for its residency pipeline, and it ran an audit of a decade of promotions. An audit that confirmed what the staff had always known and never been able to prove, that physicians and nurses of color had been passed over for advancement at nearly 3 times the rate of their white colleagues. The numbers were published inside the hospital. Every employee saw them. Nobody could look away. The dedication gala came back to the pavilion the following spring. Same glass wall, same marble, same absurd reflecting pool. But the room felt wider somehow, as though the walls had quietly moved to make space for people who'd always been kept at the edges. Adana Reeves stood near the entrance greeting guests, and she shook every hand that was offered. Every single one. At 7:20, a young man came through the doors, 24, a first-year resident named Theo Sawyer. His suit a half-size too big in the shoulders, his tie knotted one attempt too many. He looked the way everyone looks at their first hospital gala, thrilled and terrified, and certain he was about to say the wrong thing to the wrong person. He saw Adana. He hesitated. Then he squared his jacket, crossed the floor, and put out his hand. "Dr. Reeves, I'm Theo Sawyer. I just started on the cardiac service. It's an honor." Adana took his hand in both of hers. "Theo, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here." 5 words. They cost nothing. They took less than 2 seconds. They meant everything. Somewhere in the room, a string trio began to play. The same bright piece that had drifted through this atrium a year before, when a different hand had been extended and a different answer had been given. Sella Ellison was not there. She hadn't been invited, and she had asked not to be. She was in her office late that evening, reading a draft of Larkspur's new code of conduct. Section 9 was titled Dignity in Every Interaction. It was 3 paragraphs long, it was specific, it was enforceable, and it existed because of one night, one outstretched hand, and one woman who had refused 3 times to take it. She read it twice, and she approved it, and she closed the file. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a photograph, creased and soft at the corners, the color bleeding at the edges. Her mother standing in front of the house on John's Island in a housekeeper's uniform, holding a little girl's hand. The little girl was looking up at her the way a child looks at the person she believes will never let go. Some hands are held out to greet you, some are held out to test you, and some are held out to remind the world that the measure of a person was never in the hands they took, but in the ones they turned away. Sella put the photograph back in the drawer, turned off the lamp, and went home.